This is your story. This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. In the days when judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi. The names of their 2 sons was Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. They went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, and one was named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. When Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home," but Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her.
In the lower story, all hope is lost for Naomi. She moved from Bethlehem to Moab with her husband to weather the storm of a famine raging in the land around them at the same time as Gideon's story from the last chapter. Not long after they arrive, her husband dies, but she still has her 2 sons to care for her. While they are in Moab, they both marry Moabite women, and 10 years later, tragically, both of her sons die. In complete emptiness, Naomi decides it's time to go back home to Bethlehem. Her daughter-in-laws decide that they want to go. She begs them not to come, that they will have a better life if they stay in Moab. She finishes her speech with these painful words, "No, my daughters, it's more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." In the lower story, we see that she had lost all hope, and she felt it was all a result of the Lord's doing in the upper story. Naomi was able to convince the one daughter-in-law to stay, but the other, Ruth, insisted that she go. Here's how she put her decision. "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." She has certainly chose the road less traveled. Life will be extremely hard for Naomi and Ruth. They will likely live in poverty the rest of their life. And to make matters worse, Ruth is a Moabite. The Moabites had oppressed the Israelites for 18 years before Ehud the judge delivered them. In the lower story, there was little chance that she would be accepted. Yet out of deep love for her mother-in-law and her well-being, this is the path that she chose. When Naomi and Ruth's sandals crossed into Bethlehem's borders, after being gone for over a decade, the women of the town exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" Naomi replied, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." The word Mara in Hebrew obviously means bitter. She is really convinced that God has orchestrated all of this, and he has, but she just doesn't know how the story will end. Now, Naomi owns land that her husband and sons used to farm. However, Naomi can't manage this property by herself, so she'll be forced to sell her land to pay the bills. And once she does, this will basically be committing her life to servitude. But the bigger, bitter pill to swallow is that the identity of a family is tied to land ownership. If her husband's land is lost, it'll be as though he never existed. So how will two poor single ladies make it in Bethlehem? Well, the Old Testament made a provision for the poor called gleaning. Those who owned land would send the harvesters into the field to gather the crop. Whatever little was left, they were to leave for the poor to glean. This is Ruth's primary way to help and to show love to her aging mother-in-law. She will do the gleaning and hopefully bring home enough for both of them to live on. She randomly picks a field to glean, and the owner shows her favor. Ruth is shocked that she is accepted as an outsider and even given protection. Here's what she asked the owner. "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" He replies, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth runs home with her arms filled with food and excitement and shares the story with Naomi over a Thanksgiving meal. Naomi inquires about the identity of the owner, and Ruth tells her that his name is Boaz. Naomi almost has a heart attack. Why? Because Boaz is a close relative. Why is she so excited about that? You see, there is a concept taught in the law, in Deuteronomy 25 to be exact, that states that if a man dies without an heir, the next of kin has the option to marry his widow, love her, take care of her, pay off the financial debts, and redeem the land. This man is called the kinsman redeemer. When they have a child, he is to deed the land to that heir in the name of the deceased husband, thus allowing his name to live on. Essentially, the kinsman redeemer takes on a huge risk and in the end doesn't increase his net worth a single penny. Naomi hasn't been this hopeful in a long time. She takes on the role of a Jewish matchmaker like the one you see in The Fiddler on the Roof. She tells Ruth to take a shower and splash on some Chanel 5 and put on her Sabbath best. She was then to head over to Boaz's house that night, playing the part of Cinderella. She needed to wait until he had finished eating. You never approach a man with an empty stomach. After he went to bed, she was to sneak in and uncover his feet and lie down at the foot of his bed. Boaz would understand exactly what Ruth was doing. It was a nonverbal way of requesting marriage. Ruth does everything Naomi asks of her. And Boaz wakes up startled and asks who she is. She replies, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." Now, the word for garment in Hebrew is the same word for wing. When Ruth first met Boaz, he referred to God's wing providing her refuge. Ruth was now asking Boaz to be God's wing to her, and he accepted. He exercised his obligation, and they were married. He not only bought Ruth's widow's land, but all his brother's land and their father's as well. Risking his own estate, didn't add to his personal treasury by one line item, and redeemed them all. What drives a Boaz to turn his attention from his own selfish needs and wants to reach out to an outsider? Well, as it turns out, Boaz, the now strong, wealthy, respected man in Bethlehem, knew what it was like to be an outsider. We learn in another part of the story of the Bible that Boaz's mother is Rahab, the harlot. Rahab was the Canaanite prostitute that provided coverage for Joshua's spies when they were scoping out the land. She risked her life and as a result was adopted into the family of Israel. Boaz knew what it felt like to be an outsider at one time and had it in his heart to reach out to someone else in that same position. As it turns out, that person was Ruth. Ruth and Boaz had a little boy together. That little lad didn't know it yet, but he will inherit the land of his father, Mahlon, whom he never met. He will carry on that family name, because of the kind act of Boaz. The women of the town said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer." In the lower story, Naomi thought her life was over, that God had given up on her. Well, she was mistaken. Naomi took her grandson and cuddled him in her lap. The women of the town spread the gossip. Naomi has a son. What happened to the name Mara? Bitter. I guess it didn't stick. She went back to being called Naomi, which in Hebrew means beautiful. And beautiful her life became. She now had a son to work the land, which meant that the name of her husband, Elimelech, would live on. The little heir's name was Obed, which simply means worker. Sounds like a boring name until you understand the whole story. As overwhelming a turnaround as this is, the good news doesn't stop here. There's more going on in the upper story. At the end of the book of Ruth, we are given the genealogy of Boaz's family. It is here that Obed grows up and has a son named Jesse. Jesse then grows up and has a son named David. And 28 generations later, a little baby is born in a manger in the town of Bethlehem named Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate kinsman redeemer, and he came from the family of an outsider named Ruth. God was not only working above the scene of Ruth's life to provide her earthly needs in the lower story, he was working out his upper story plan with her in mind. He went out of his way to include an outsider, a pagan Moabite in the lineage of Jesus. Now that is extreme acceptance. In the lower story, their life seemed hopeless with no chance of acceptance. In the upper story, God redeems their lives and accepts them as his own. You know, right now, your story might seem a little hopeless and bitter to the taste. But remember, if you love God and align your life to his purposes, as we learn in Romans 8:28, God is working it all out for the good. So wait patiently for God. Wait patiently for God to unfold his good plan for you.
Can you hear me now? No. Yeah, there I am. Hi. It's good to see all of y'all. This story was very interesting to me. As we've been going through the story, a lot just seems so familiar. So we've heard it a lot. It's just how things build, grew up in the church. You hear all of these. When I got into this and started looking at this particular, the book of Ruth, and the way it's presented here, I think the video did an incredible job of kind of tying everything together. This particular one is one that I believe helped me to tie a large section of the Bible to better understand the overall story. The details of this are so obscure to me, so foreign to me, because this is not how we do things now. The way that this whole thing laid out, the kindred redeemer and all of this stuff is so different, it's so foreign to us in our American way of thinking in 2024. It just, if I focused on the details, I don't understand this, I don't understand that, I would really, really, really miss the overall picture that he just laid out. And the overall picture is what we've seen many, many times. It's God taking someone or a number of people that have no real significance to them as far as what the world sees, and uses them for his glory and to further what he wants to do. And I love that about this story. And it's not just one person, it's a number of people in this story. A lot of stories that we hear about are just, you've got one individual that God pulls out, separates, and moves forward with his plan and changes something. This has numerous people in it that God does something special with and puts in their hearts him. They see him now through these people. So some of the questions here are that were in your workbook, a little simplistic in a way, but we're going to read them anyway. But I want y'all to really kind of talk past some of the questions here and get deeper in what it really means to you when you read this and studied this. So early in the story of Ruth, what do you see in her character? Grit? Okay, faithfulness. Think early in the story. You have Naomi and her husband. They leave. Why did they leave? Why did they leave Bethlehem? They were starving. It was a famine. And they went to Moab. Now, is Moab what you would call friends of Israel? No, they've been fighting for as long as they've been around. But they went there because they're starving, and she took her sons with her. Her sons got married to Moabite women. Is that typical for an Israelite man to marry a Moabite woman? No, it's not. So Naomi's in a really difficult situation now that her husband dies. She has 2 sons, but they live in a foreign country. They're doing things that aren't typically done as Israelites. They're in a country that serves pagan gods. This is the scenario that they're in. So then you bring in Ruth, one of her daughter-in-laws. What do you see based on what happens later? What has to happen during that 10 years or so that they're there? Yes. She introduced Ruth to God. What type of person, what type of temperament did God give Naomi during this time? What kind of woman was she? Well, this is right after he died. They lived there for 10 more years. So during that 10 years, what kind of woman was she? Okay. A what? A believer. her two daughter-in-laws, after their husbands died, her two daughter-in-laws wanted to go with her. So that tells me that for 10 years, this widow was a strong, caring, loving leader in her family. Despite everything else going on. Her Moabite daughter-in-laws would not have seen her that way if it was not true. They would not have followed her or wanted to follow her back to Israel. Why did she go back to Israel? What did it say in the scriptures? Do you recall? Famine had ended. God had provided. It says God had provided food. So, best case scenario for her was to go back and hope that something good could come out of it in her original hometown where she came from. So, the video got it a little different than what the scripture says, in that it says that they started home or started back to Israel. Both Naomi and both of her daughter-in-laws started. And on the trip, she tried to convince her daughter-in-laws to stay where they were. Why would she do that? She didn't want her daughter-in-laws to have to go through what she was about to have to go through for the rest of her life. They were still young. They could still get married. It was a different culture in Moabite than it was in Israel. They're still going to have a really good chance of getting married and living a normal life there. She convinces one of them to do that, just that. Ruth, on the other hand, made a commitment. She just didn't say, "Oh, I'm just going to go with you and help you out." This was, "I'm going to go with you, and may God do the worst if I back out of this. I will live with you. I will take care of you. I will die. I will be buried where you're buried, and let God do whatever he needs to with me if I back out of this." That's called a commitment. That is somebody who loves and cares about somebody so much that they would give up, quote, their future to make sure that that person's okay. That's love. And that only comes because Naomi also had loved her. And so you have these two widows that are tied themselves together to go through life in what would likely be a very, very difficult life together. And they committed to that. That's the stage that we have. That's the reality of their life. It was very, very difficult. So as they get there, back into Bethlehem, it's been 10 years. She walks into town, and her old friends recognize her and come up to her and greet her. And show love to her and care about her. What does she say back to him? Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. Well, that sets the stage when you come back home, doesn't it? It lets everybody know the difficulty that she's in, the heart, how hard this has been on her, how challenging her life she knows is about to be. And right now she's blaming it on God. She certainly knows he's in charge of it. So, what do you take from that? The idea that you're going through this because God put you in that situation. Okay. Anyone else? State of depression. Yeah. Yeah. Have y'all ever returned home after being gone for a long time? I remember when I grew up in Bentonville, and after going off to college and then Rob and I got married, and then we moved back to Northwest Arkansas. And while we were looking for a place to live, we stayed at my parents' house in Bentonville. And so we attended church there in Bentonville. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm a lot different than I was in high school. And when you go back home, sometimes people look at you like they did when you were 15 or 16 years old. And they treat you like you're 15 or 16 years old. And they assume things about you like you were 15 or 16 years old. I have a feeling some of that was here. She saw all her friends. Oh, is that Naomi? Oh, everything's going to be like it was. Naomi's been through a lot in that decade. A lot. Living in a foreign country, being exposed to all the paganism there, losing her husband, then losing both of her sons. This is not the same lady that left, by the way, by any stretch of the imagination. She has changed. There's no way she couldn't have changed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did not look that up. I was hoping you would tell me. Did you look it up? No. Okay. Anybody know how far they traveled? Well, you have no help here. Sorry. So this process, now that she's here, now that Ruth's here, this process for redeeming someone is that process is very foreign to us. So basically, the closest relative has the option of paying for the land that they own, taking care of the family, and having a child that would become the inheritor of all of that land. That's a very different culture than what we have today. It's one that requires a very big commitment. You're now in charge of all this land that you will not get anything from in the future. You will have another child, another wife, all to give it all away. But it's to save that family's name in history. It's a big commitment. But that honor goes to the one closest, the relative closest to the person that passed away. So the process by which Ruth presents herself to Boaz is foreign to us. This question says, what do you see in her actions that demonstrates having the right heart? She listened to her mother-in-law. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Was Boaz same age as Ruth? He's quite a bit older. Quite a bit older. So in Ruth, what could Ruth be thinking about here? Do what? Sugar daddy, okay. The opposite side of that too. I want to be stuck with this old guy for the rest of my life. So what do you guys think? I mean, this is all speculation. This is not something written in here. What do you think is going through Ruth's mind? This is a foreign concept, remember. Okay. Yeah. Okay. She was desperate. Her meal ticket. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. She had a commitment. She was faithful to the commitment she made a long time or before. She's going to stick with Naomi. Naomi is trying to help the whole situation, and she's trusting in Naomi and wants to do the right thing. So let's switch gears here. What are your thoughts on Boaz? But even before that, he is an upright man that cares about people. He was kind to her throughout the whole thing. He also ended up knowing who she was, and he respected her. Why? Well, not just that, but what did he do for Naomi? She stood by Naomi. And he found out about that and had total respect for somebody who would stand by Naomi, would leave her home country, bypass a normal life that she could have had to take care of Naomi. How can you not respect that? How can you not appreciate that? What else about Boaz? I mean, Ruth came in, basically said, hey, marry me, in their way. And what did Boaz do? But he had to get it settled. He had to ask someone else if they wanted that right first. Somebody else had the right to redeem them and their property. That's an upright man. Goes there, lays it all out, gives the person the opportunity, and as soon as that person says no, he jumps on it. He's like, this is now my family. So how does all of this story, how does this relate to the big picture? It boils down to the lineage of Christ. Okay. Ruth, through all her ancestors, Jesus is born. But the process of redeeming, the process of this whole story that lays out, that's representative of what? Christ and his redeeming. It's a foreshadowing. And it's not just of Israel, it's the foreshadowing of redeeming anyone, everyone. And I love that part of it because who were the Moabites again? Descendants of Lot out of an ancestral relationship that served pagan gods. That's who the Moabites were. And you have a widowed Moabite woman is now the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus Christ. That's God's story of his redemption for us. No matter where we come from, no matter who we are, no matter the circumstances, he's there to redeem us. What else from this story do y'all want to talk about? people. Yeah. It would have been a financial hardship, I think he said. He would have. Yeah. And he doesn't gain anything by this because it will eventually become his son's. So financially, he doesn't benefit by buying this. The first kinsman, he figured with a wife, mother-in-law, kids coming, it would be too much of a burden on him. So he passed on the opportunity. Yeah. Yeah, they never said his name. They never told us who he was. Female Job. Mm-hmm. And what do Naomi, and the thing about that, Naomi and Job, after the bad happened, both of them struggled with God, but never turned away from God. So there's the other lesson in that. It's okay when bad things happen to struggle through it. Just don't turn away from God, because he is the one that will redeem you in the future. So how long would it take you to walk that? 50 years. Yeah. It's plenty long of a journey. Well, it's 1 minute till the bell, so let's just say a quick prayer. Dear God, thank you for this day, and thank you for the opportunity to come here and spend time with family and friends and those who love you. Let us take your lessons and put them on our hearts and learn about you and love others through what we've learned. Continue to be with us, Lord, and guide us and lead us the way you want us to go. In Christ's name, amen.